At first, it's just a phrase, whispered before a meal, muttered before a journey, etched into calligraphy across a million doorways. Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim. But behind those 11 Arabic words lies a buried history of political rivalry, theological tension, and the fight to define a divine name, one that nearly tore the early Muslim world apart. Most Muslims today recite the Basmala almost instinctively. It opens every surah of the Quran except one. But what if I told you that for centuries, scholars weren't even sure if it counted as part of the Quranic text? That the formula, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, was once a site of fierce debate, its inclusion shaped as much by politics as by piety? A phrase that today feels timeless, sacred and foundational, once hung in the balance between liturgical custom and canonical uncertainty. Let's rewind to the earliest days of Islam. The Quran's first revelations didn't call God Al-Rahman. They used Rab, the Lord, a word familiar across ancient Semitic tongues, found in Hebrew, Adonai, Aramaic, Rabbah, and even in pre-Islamic Arab traditions. It was safe, neutral, an anchoring point in a sea of theological transitions. But then something changed. Later verses, especially in the Meccan and Medinan periods, began invoking Allah and Al-Rahman more frequently, terms that stirred discomfort in the hearts of the Quraysh elite. Why? Because Al-Rahman wasn't just a name, it was contested territory. In southern Arabia, long before Islam, Rahmanan, the Merciful One, was a title used for deities in Himyarite and Hadramitic cultures. Epigraphic evidence from the 4th to 6th centuries CE shows that South Arabian monotheists used Rahmanan in inscriptions such as Bismi Rahmanan wa Mikail wa Jibril, meaning in the name of the Merciful One, Michael and Gabriel, a divine triad that fused Jewish, Christian, and local religious motifs. This wasn't Islam's innovation. It was a linguistic echo. So when the prophet's revelations began proclaiming a new monotheism with that exact title, it wasn't just a theological shift, it was a linguistic landmine, a reactivation of an ancient term that carried baggage and blurred boundaries. Surah 17, verse 110, tackles this tension directly. Say, call upon Allah or call upon Al-Rahman, whichever you invoke, to him belong the most beautiful names. On the surface, it's a unifying statement, but beneath it, we hear the friction of competing traditions, the soft undertone of pushback from polytheistic Meccan elites. According to several classical tafsir, or commentaries, this verse came in response to Quraysh mocking the prophet. We know who Allah is, but who is this Al-Rahman? Their taunt wasn't about theology, it was about territory. They feared the prophet was co-opting a southern cultic name, or worse, echoing a rival prophet. And then there was Musaylima. He wasn't just a self-proclaimed prophet, he was the rival. A charismatic figure from the Banu Hanifa tribe in Yamama, Musaylima claimed divine revelation and composed verses that mimicked the Quran, verses with poetic rhythm, moral exhortation, and divine authority. Verses that weren't simply poor imitations, but compelling enough to draw genuine interest. According to the Christian writer Al-Kindi, I have read a collection by Musaylima that, had it appeared, might have brought several of your friends to renounce Islam. Whether this was exaggeration or not, it reveals the unease felt by early Muslims toward Musaylima's shadow scripturalism. But here's the twist. Musaylima didn't just claim prophethood, he used Ar-Rahman as his God's name. He opened revelations with phrases strikingly similar to Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This wasn't theological coincidence, it was strategic overlap. In the religious environment of Central Arabia, the name Ar-Rahman carried local authority, ancient resonance, and monotheistic familiarity. Musaylima was tapping into a reservoir that was culturally charged and spiritually potent. The prophet's use of Al-Rahman thus wasn't just about divine names. It was a claim over spiritual language itself. Who gets to speak in the name of Rahman? Who owns the invocation? In regions like Yamama, Musailima's message spread quickly, aided by this semantic mirroring. His following grew, his verses were recited. His authority became more than tribal, it became theological. And this deeply alarmed the early Muslim community. The overlap between the Quranic Al-Rahman and Musailima's invocation of the same title turned the divine name into a battlefield of legitimacy. Could the very formula that begins most surahs of the Quran have once sounded suspiciously like the words of a false prophet? The war that followed, the Ridda or apostasy wars, wasn't just about tribes rejecting Medina's authority. It was a war over revelation, over scripture, over who could rightfully speak in the name of the divine. And when Musailima fell at the Battle of Yamama in 632 CE, it wasn't only a political victory, it was a theological purge. But the cost was staggering. Among the dead were dozens, perhaps hundreds of Qurra, those who had memorized large portions of the Quran. The oral chain of preservation had been shattered. In that vacuum of memory and authority, Caliph Abu Bakr took an extraordinary step to gather the Quran into a written codex. Zayd ibn Thabit, the Prophet's trusted scribe, was chosen to lead this project. It was a task filled with urgency and reverence. Every fragment, every verse had to be authenticated. Every harf had to be treated like a relic. And at the heart of this process lay one difficult question. Was the Basmala part of the revelation or simply a sacred tradition? Some schools, particularly in Medina, Syria, and Basra, leaned toward caution. They treated the Basmala as a divider, a liturgical introduction rather than a divine verse. Reciters like Hamza avoided it between surahs altogether. To them, the Quran was a flowing revelation, uninterrupted by formulaic breaks. The Basmala was seen as a human marker, an editorial breath, not a divine line. But other schools, like the Shafis in Mecca and Kufa, took the opposite view. For them, the Basmala was revelation in its own right. Omitting it was not a stylistic choice, it was a theological omission. It wasn't just about form, it was about mercy. Every surah, they argued, must begin with God's compassion, God's softness. To strip that away was to misrepresent the tone of divine speech itself. And then, there are the manuscripts, early Quranic codices or silent witnesses to this tension. Their pages, ink, spacing, and script choices reveal more than words ever could. Take the Codex Parisino-Petropolitanus, BNF Arabe 328a, dated to the 7th century. The Basmala appears inconsistently, sometimes there, sometimes not. Often it's unnumbered, sometimes squeezed into the margin. It was clearly respected, but not clearly canonized. Then there's the Codex Sana'a I, discovered in Yemen. This palimpsest, an overwritten manuscript with traces of an earlier text, famously omits the Basmala before Surah 9. The transition from Surah 8 to 9 is abrupt, with no space for mercy. Scholars see this as more than scribal habit, it's a deliberate choice, a silent echo of early debates over the verse's status. The Topkapi manuscript, preserved in Istanbul and associated with the Uthmanic recension, presents the Basmala visually separated, often in distinct calligraphy, unnumbered, treated more as prologue than verse. The Codex Mashhad, kept in Iran, follows suit. The formatting suggests the Basmala was recognized, but not fully integrated into the verse count. It stood on the threshold between divine speech and ritual framing. And then there's the Birmingham manuscript, a fragment carbon dated to between 568 and 645 CE, contemporary with the Prophet himself. While fragmentary, it offers no preserved Basmala text, leaving open the question of whether it was ever part of its early leaves. What survives, though, reflects a Quranic tradition still fluid, still forming, before editorial consensus had fully crystallized. Over time, the Basmala's status became stable, not because its origin was resolved, but because its function was undeniable. It had become part of the rhythm, the ritual, the reverence, like the mysterious, disconnected letters, alif, lam, mim. It may have begun with obscure meaning, perhaps even editorial purpose, but it was sanctified through repetition, cemented by devotion. This evolution wasn't accidental. It was a reflection of Islam's reverence for oral memory, for the Prophet's voice, for even the possibility of his utterance. Early Muslims were cautious. They preserved not only clear meanings, but ambiguous signs, just in case. Because what if that breath, that phrase, that pause was once divine? The Basmala's journey, from liturgical preface to canonical fixture, tells us something profound about how Scripture is made. Not in isolation, not dropped fully formed, but shaped by politics, by rival claims, by grief, by memory, by the urgency to preserve something that once danced on human tongues and was nearly lost in war. So the next time you whisper Bismillah before you begin, remember what began with it. If this deep dive into sacred history stirred your curiosity, don't forget to subscribe for more stories hidden between the lines of tradition. And if you'd like to support this work, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or sending a one-time gift via PayPal. Every contribution helps bring more forgotten histories to light.